In the name of God, we want to continue our discussion from a cross-linguistically valid description of morphosyntactic structures. In 1.4 part, we argued that cross-linguistic comparison in the first chapter must be ultimately founded on the external functional definition. Nevertheless, one must have a cross-linguistically valid means to describe formal grammatical structures. This section presents such a system. We argued that a cross-linguistic comparison must be ultimately founded on external functional definitions. Nevertheless, one must have a cross-linguistically valid means to describe formal grammatical structures. In order to illustrate the classification of cross-linguistic structural types, we will use the example of the possessive construction, defined as the semantic relationship of ownership as used when the speaker intends to refer to the possessed item, like the possessum in the head of the possessive noun phrase, and the possessor is the modifier. Here we explain this matter through the possessive construction, which here we have the definition of possessive construction, and we have two parts. In possessive construction, one of them is possessum or possessed item, and another one is possessor, which in different language we show that in different way. Like the possessum is the head of the possessive noun phrase, and the possessor is a modifier. This example has the virtue of being relatively simple compared to the clause level construction such as relative clause and comparative, and relatively uncontroversial compared to grammatical subjects. The typology of possessive constructions provided here is not exhaustive. The typology of possessive constructions provided here is not exhaustive. It doesn't give justice to the complexity of this grammatical domain. It is intended more to illustrate the range of morphosyntactic strategies used by languages than to present the full diversity of possessive constructions. The possessive construction displays the range of problems that we wish to address here. Possessive construction displays practically the full range of morphosyntactic strategies used to relate to morphemes or syntactic elements, and thus serve as a useful introduction to the basic grammatical structures that will appear throughout this volume. In a few cases, however, we will have to draw on examples of other constructions. We begin by describing simple strategies that don't involve an additional morpheme to express the relation between possessor and possessum. We then turn to strategies with an additional morpheme, either relational, encoding the relationship itself, or indexical, indexing the members of the relation. We then look at more highly grammaticalized strategies involving an additional morpheme. Dear student, here we can see the different way of different expressing the possessive construction. Here we will read the different strategies to express the possessive construction. One of the ways to express the possessive construction, which is the simple strategies. The first set of constructions are those which don't involve an additional morpheme beyond the forms used to express the possessor and the possessor. Okay, the simple way or the simplest strategies and the first set of constructions are those which don't involve an additional morpheme beyond the forms used to express the possessor and possessum. They don't use the additional morpheme to express the possessor and possessum. The simplest strategy is juxtaposition. Okay, you should know that. The simplest strategy to express the possessive construction is juxtaposition. The juxtaposition of the possessor and the possessum in one order to the other. We change their order without any morphological attachment or alternation of either constituent. This strategy is quite common. Okay, we just juxtapose the position of the possessor and possessum without any morphological attachment or alternation of either constituents. Here you can see their example, for example in Europa, which they just change the situation of possessor and possessum. Cap acanda, which is acanda's cap. They just juxtapose their position, and even in this language, we just juxtapose their position without any additional morpheme or other changes. The second strategy is morphological concatenation. The second, you should know this strategy, dear student, to express the possessive construction. The second strategy is morphological concatenation. What we mean by that? In one type of concatenation, affixation, the possessor is morphologically an affix on the head noun possessor. Okay, in one type of concatenation, affixation, the possessor is morphologically an affix on the head noun possessor. This is most commonly found with pronominal possessor, which are affixes. Here you can see their example. In Tigre, which we express the possession but through the affix, and here is pronominal affix, his. Photograph, third person singular, which means his photograph. However, it is occasionally found with nominal possessor, in which case it is called compounding, since it involves two roots of major syntactic categories, like my brother dog, my brother's dog. Here we have we use the compounding way. The examples are not important for a final exam and for your summarizing. Just we give this example to clear the matter. Affixation and compounding are historical developments from juxtaposition. The juxtaposed elements become morphologically bound. Okay, I want to repeat it again. Affixation and compounding, which here we have the example of compounding, and here is affixation. Affixation and compounding are historical developments from juxtaposition. The juxtaposed elements become morphologically bound. Okay, we should know that. Affixation and compounding, which are belong to the second strategy, they are historical development from the juxtaposition, which was the simple way to express the possessive construction. How this happened? The juxtaposed elements become morphologically bound. You should know that. The third strategy is fusion. Combines or fuses the two elements, possessor and possessum, into one unit You should know that. Maybe I ask you that what we mean by fusion. The third strategy, which is fusion, combines or fuses the two elements, possessor and possessum, into one unit. Fusion is rare, but is found with basic kin terms. Okay, fusion almost always happen in kin terms and pronominal possessor, possessive modifiers in some languages. You should know that. What we mean by fusion? By fusion we mean combines or fuses the two elements, possessor and possessum, into one unit, and it happens in kin terms and pronominal possessor. It happens rare, like here in Lakhuta, which we have my mother, for example, your mother, his or her mother. They are the kin terms, and we use the fusion for that. We express the possessor and possessive in one terms. Fusion may arise from a compounding of pronominal possessor and kin terms. Fusion may arise from the compounding of pronominal possessor, here pronominal my, your, his or her, and the kin terms mother, possibly a suppletive kin term form that is no longer analyzable. Okay. Another strategy, that was the simple strategy, which contains three methods. The relational strategies. The next set of strategies involves the employment of an additional morpheme to encode the relation between possessor and possessum. The next set of strategies involves the employment of an additional morpheme. Here we use the additional morpheme to encode the relation between possessor and possessum. Okay, in the relational strategies we use the additional morpheme to express the relation between possessor and possessum. You should know that. Following the definition in 1.4 in first chapter, we distinguished relational and indexical morphemes. Relational and indexical morphemes originate from a lexical item in the process called grammaticalization. You should know that, what we mean by grammaticalization. Relational and indexical morpheme originate from the lexical item by the process of grammaticalization. It means that the lexical item turn to the grammatical item or morphological item, which we call that grammaticalization, and evolve further to the point that the relational or indexical character cannot be identified. For this reason, the boundaries between morpheme types are not sharp. Okay, here we told you that the relational and indexical character cannot be identified. For this reason, boundaries between morpheme types are not sharp. And so we will discuss the chronic development as well as morpheme types to found them. Relational morphemes are called case markers. You should know that. Another name for relational morpheme, dear student. Another name for the relational morpheme is case markers. Relational morphemes are called case markers. Bound relational morphemes are called case affixes, and the free relational morphemes are called adpositions. You should know all of these terms. They are important. You should mention them in your summarization task, and for your final exam you should know these names. Maybe I ask you that what we mean by adpositions. You should know that adposition is the relational morpheme. Okay, relational morpheme, we call the relational morpheme as case markers. Bound relational morpheme are case affixes, but free relational morpheme are adposition. The free relational morpheme are adposition, and the bound relational morpheme are case affixes, and as a whole the relational morpheme are case marker. Prepositions precede and pause position follow. You should know that the preposition precede the matter we want to study, and when we say that pause position, it means that it follow that. A genitive case affix. Genitive case affix. When we say that case affix, it means that it is a bound relational morpheme, dear student. It means that the genitive is a bound relational morpheme. The genitive case affix or the genitive bound relational morpheme is illustrated in 6 for Russian, and the genitive at position, which means that the genitive free relational morpheme is illustrated in 7 in Bulgarian. Here at the 6 we have the genitive case affix, means genitive bound relational morpheme, which is a bound relational morpheme, which we show that by a in this language, which is genitive, means Ivan's book, for example, book Ivan, which we show that is possession construction through this genitive case affix or relational bound relational morpheme, which is a. And here we have free relational morpheme, which is at position. We show that through na. My mother's new book. Diachronically, case affixes arises from at positions that becomes affixed to the noun. Okay. Diachronically, case affixes or bound relational morpheme arise from the at positions, arise from the free relational morpheme that become affixed to the noun. In some cases, the position comes to be affixed to the verb. Which in such context, the relational morpheme is not usually called a case marker. Adpositions in turn arise from relational nouns. Adpositions in turn arise from the relational noun. The adpositions themselves come from the relational noun. For example, the zoological adposition match, mean because of, on account of, developed from its lexical meaning, means seen, which here we can see its example. The woman was hit because of the man, which this adposition arises from the relational noun. For example, in this language, match, which means because of or account of, developed from the lexical meaning seen. Adpositions may also arise from verbs. Adpositions may also arise from verbs in a serial verb construction with another verb. One verb describes the main event, while the other verb signals a semantic participant rule. For example, the Yoruba verb fun performs the dative function, which developed from its lexical meaning give. Here we can see that fun, which is dative, they will pay me. Finally, adpositions may arise from adverbs, as such occurred in the history of Indo-European, where directional adverbs such as in, out, through, and so on have become adpositions, as in English they went in through the K. Indexical strategies. The most common indexical morphemes are called agreement markers, concord markers, cross-reference markers, or indexation markers. You should know all of these terms. The most common indexical morphemes. We have here 4 types of indexical morpheme. The most common indexical morphemes are called agreement markers. We call the most of the indexical morphemes as the agreement markers. Concord markers, cross-reference markers, or indexation markers. You should know them. The term agreement, also used far more commonly than the other, implies that there is a phrase in the utterance that is agreed with the controller, for example, that is necessarily present. In fact, it often is not, and so the term indexation will be used here. There is a natural classification of indexical coded dependencies into two types, depending on whether they encode the category of person, which in turn is due to their origin in personal pronouns or in demonstrative pronouns. Lacking better terms for these two types, I will call them person indexation or non-person indexation respectively. Person indexation can be illustrated by the indexation of a possessed noun with its possessor, as in mem. Here you can see its example. The third person, which we show that through te, means the orphans, for example, prize, which in this language they show that through this marker. Person indexation arises through the attachment of a personal pronoun, usually to the head noun or verb or in clauses, but sometimes to another constituent, and the allowing of a second noun phrase to accompany the former pronoun in reference. The most easily accessible examples of the rise of person indexation are from verb indexation, not possessive indexation. The following examples capture the evolution of doubling in progress. In Chichewa, no indexation of the direct object occurs if the object follows the verb. Okay. In Chichewa, no indexation of the direct object occurs if the object follows the verb, like in 11. Because the direct object here, LNG, mean hunter, because it follows the verb, mean bite. Here we show that through the loom. We don't have indexation because in this language, no indexation occurs when the direct object follows the verb. But indexation is required if the object is fronted the verb, like here. Here we have loom, which is verb, but here we have indexation between the ing, mean hunter, and the va. Here they are co-indexed because it comes, the object comes before the verb. In canary, the object indexation marker may occur alone, like here. In this example, the object indexation marker occur alone, but its presence is optional when an independent pronoun occurs, like here. Maybe we have indexation or not. It is optional, but here in 15 we have co-indexation. The prototypical example of non-person indexation is indexation of an adjective or the other modifier in gender, number, and or case with a head noun, as with the Russian possessive adjectives. Here you can see its example, which we show through that ja and a. It means that my book, first person singular, which is indexed in this way. It appears that non-person indexation originates from articles. Okay, the non-person indexation originates from the articles, which in turn arise from demonstratives. In a headless modifier construction, which is then combined with an ordinary noun head. The most easily accessible examples of the rise of non-person indexation are from adjective indexation, not possessive indexation. So we must again digress from possessive construction. In modern Hebrew, article occur with both the head noun and the modifier. Okay, here we have the article with the head noun and the modifier in this language. Here is the modifier, and here we have again, and here. The article occurs with both the head noun, which is program, and with the modifier, which is this. In modern Greek, an emphatic double article construction for post-nominal modifiers coexist with a pre-nominal modifier construction with only a single article for the whole noun phrase. Here you can see its example that the emphatic double article construction for post-nominal modifiers coexist with the pre-nominal modifiers. They are coexist with each other. And here we have again with only a single article for the whole noun phrase. Returning to the possessive construction in superior, a prohibited possessive phrase uses the possessive proform vous, which inflects for gender of the noun to which the proform refers. Here you can see its example. As in modern Greek adjectives, an ordinary pronominal modifier construction coexists with a post-nominal modifier construction, doubling the proform with an ordinary head noun, and the protoform indexes the head noun. Here we can see the example of this language. The examples are not very important. You should just look at them to get the point. Classifier, indexical or relational. A class of over-coded dependencies whose status as indexical or relational is somewhat problematic or classifier. Classifiers are used in a variety of grammatical constructions, including possessive constructions. The possessive classifier denotes a property of the possessed object. Okay, the possessive classifier denotes a property of the possessed object. In the example 23 is a possessive construction in Caesarian with the classifier for plants. The possessor is expressed only as a person suffix on the classifier, which you can see its example. Possessive classifiers are not the only type of classifier. In fact, they are not even the commonest type of classifier. Numeral classifiers are commonly found in numeral constructions. The classifier chosen reflects a property of the object quantified by the numeral. Example 24 is a numeral construction in throw with the classifier for long object. A third also uncommon classifier construction is a verbal classifier, in which a separate morpheme reflects a property of one of the arguments. As such, verbal classification looks very much like person indexation. In example 25 illustrates a verb argument construction in Kado with the classifier for granular substances. Here you can see the example here. The chief diachronic source of classifiers are known. One common source of classifiers is a repeator construction in which the noun or the genetic part of the noun compound is repeated with the modifier, as in the following Nahi demonstrative construction, which here they repeat that classifier. Here they repeat that. The verbal classifiers described by Mitton in 1984 represent another path of origin of classifiers. They are what she calls type IV noun incorporation, namely noun incorporation that has been extended to an indexation function. The nominal source of most classifiers strongly suggests that classifiers are fundamentally indexical in nature. The classifier denotes the object classified, which is one of the elements of the syntactic relation. Further evidence in favor of this position is that all classifiers have an anaphoric function. However, some classifiers, particularly possessive classifiers, to return to our typological classification or of possession, arise from verbs. Example 27 is a non-possessive construction with the edible object classifier contrasting with the general possessive classifier in 28. Here you can see their example. However, many of the classifiers in the languages that elaborate the possessive classifiers system beyond edible, potable, other are nominal in origin. But more grammaticalized strategies. Dear students, you should know the common way to express the possessive construction, which we read in the previous paragraph. More grammaticalized strategies. The grammaticalization process may proceed to the point that it makes progressively less sense to classify a marker as indexical or relational because there is just one invariant morpheme that is used to code the dependency. Moreover, the diachronic sources are both relational and indexical. For this reason, we will simply call these more highly grammaticalized coded dependencies linkers. An example of a linker derived historically from a case affix is the English possessive enclitic apostrophe s, illustrated in 1929. For example, Teresa's shoes, which is a linker. The Queen of England's dress. Here they are the linkers. This apostrophe s is a linker. The English possessive enclitic arose from the old English genitive case suffix. This view has been contested, but Allen in 1997 argues persuasively for its sole origin in the genitive case suffix. It differs from a case affix in that there are no other case affixes in English with which it contrasts. And it always occurs between possessor and possessum. The Persian ezofe linker, illustrated in 13, arose from a relative pronoun, an indexical marker. Here you can see in Persian we say asbe mard. Here this a, which is ezofe linker, mean horse, and here we have the ezofe linker, man, means the man's horse. But in Persian they juxtapose that in this way. Horse comes first, and then they use the ezofe marker, and that the possessor, asbe mard, man's horse. The Volinian possessive linker, illustrated in 31, also arose from an indexical morpheme. Here we have Meti, John, me, Mary, John's and Mary's eyes. Here we have another linker. The Volian linker is identical with the third person singular possessive indexation suffix le, but is now used with singular and plural nominal possessor. The third person plural indexation suffix re is still used for pronominal possessor. The Moroccan Arabic linker originated from a demonstrative for discussion of the etymology of the possessive. You can see a Herring in 1980. Here you can see the possessive linker. This means camel. Here they show that in this way, through the possessive linker. In Tunisian Arabic, there is a possessive linker using a word that formally means possession or property, hence having a nominal origin like many classifiers. In this way, my house, they show that in this with this word, which means possessive, which is possessive linker, which comes at the end of, which comes after the noun. Finally, the third morpheme may itself become fused with one or other of the elements in the construction and no longer analyzable. In this case, we have a special form of the element. Okay, finally, the third morpheme may itself become fused with one or other of the elements in the construction and no longer analyzable. In this case, we have a special form of the element found specifically in the construction. An example of a special form of the possessor is commonly found with independent pronominal possessor. A special form of the possessor is commonly found with the independent pronominal possessor. For example, in Yoruba, which is our. Here, this one means our, which is we have the special form, which we show that through the pronominal, independent pronominal possessor. Eli wa. Eli means house, wa means our, means our house. This is the special form. An example of a special form of the possessum is the construct found in the Semitic languages like Syrian Arabic, which is Esed has Zalame, a story, which is the special form that flew, the flu's story. Note that the special forms may be suppletive with their paradigmatically constructing forms, or simply a morphologically irregular alternative form, like in Syrian Arabic. Okay, for summarization, the different strategies for encoding grammatical structure and their diachronic relationship are given in this figure. Okay, which craft draw that. The different strategies for encoding grammatical structure with their diachronic relationship. Here we can see them. Through the independent word, we had the independent word, concatenation and fusion. Here in this figure, you can see the diachronic paths for dependency coding. At first, we look at these figures, and here we have the explanation of this figure. We have the juxtaposition. That was the simple way to expressing the possession construction, juxtaposition, and from the juxtaposition, affixation and compounding come from the juxtaposition. And with combining both of them, we have fusion. Another one's personal pronoun, which the person indexation come from that. Demonstrative or relative pronoun, which the indexation and non-person indexation come from that. We had the classifier, which and position, which comes from the noun or verb. And we had a case affix, which was the bounding relational morpheme, but that position was a free relational morpheme. We have the called all of them as a linker, and we had a special form for expressing the possession in some languages. In this figure, dear student, this figure represents two basic grammatical properties for describing grammatical structure. This is important. This figure shows the basic grammatical properties for describing grammatical structures, to which we add a third grammatical property, order of element. Dear student, you should know these three matters, these three items. They are important. We have three basic grammatical properties for describing grammatical structure. Maybe I ask you about these three basic grammatical properties to describing the grammatical structure. One of them is additional morpheme. Through the additional morpheme, we can express the grammatical structure, which can be noun or relational, indexical, linker, or special form. Additional morpheme can represent in this way: relational, indexical, linker, special form, or noun. Another way is degree of fusion of element. It can be noun, concatenation, or fusion. And the third item for expressing the grammatical item or describing the grammatical structure is order of element. All three properties, dear student, all three properties, these three properties presuppose the ability to identify discrete elements in a construction. This is partly formal, based on what elements can occur independently in utterances, and partly external to the extent that the morphological analysis must make reference to the discrete meaning of each element. Once we assume that the elements of a construction are identified, then a number of elements, hence the presence, if any, of an additional morpheme, their degree of fusion, and their order are formal properties of the utterance. The further classification of additional morphemes is externally defined. A grammatical construction can be described in terms of these properties, which can combine in a number of ways. For example, we find various combinations of the different strategies involving additional morphemes, some of which are illustrated here. For example, we have case affix, indexation, like in Turkish, which is genitive, and indexation, which is the man's report, or certain serial in Miwok, which you can see in this way, or a linker plus at position in English, a book of John's. Suppletion plus at position in English, a book of mine. We must also describe the multiple properties of a complex construction, such as genitive in accordance with I or 3 above. First or 3 above. They are Latin numeral term. The following represents an analysis of the structure of some of the genitive construction used above. Here in cap akanda, which is bila akanda, we have juxtaposed genitive and noun, no additional morpheme. In Bulgarian, which is my mother's new book, which we have na, we have no genitive. Additional morpheme is a case marker here, is a constituent with genitive and preceded the genitive preposition, all 3 morphemes juxtaposed. Here we have the comes MIPS, third person singular, prize, and orphan. Here this te, which is we have known genitive, additional morpheme is an index. Here is a constituent with n, is affixed to an or noun and preceded noun or prefix. In Persian, we told you that asp mard. Here this a was a linker. We call that as esafe, which comes between the possessive and possessor, which is the man's horse. We have noun genitive. Additional morpheme is linker and is between the noun and genitive, altering morphemes affix. I think it is enough until what is being classified. We will continue them in the next session. Please look at this video many times to get the point. Just summarize the core matters, not the details. The examples are not important. You should know the details for your final exam, and if you had any question, ask me through the WhatsApp. Thank you.